Hello and welcome to Oxblogger TV. We're once again delving into the archives of Oxford United's past. Dan and Rich are here again to take us through some of our classic moments. We've decided that we're going to cater for a younger audience this episode by going back to 1999 and a time of intrigue and turmoil for the club. Off the field, we were crippled with debt. We had a half-built stadium and food parcels were being delivered to the staff at the club. But in January of that year, the club was deep in crisis, but were thrown a lifeline when we were drawn at home to Chelsea in the fourth round of the FA Cup. I was there, stood on the London Road. Dan, Rich, where were you?
I was stood outside before the match selling my Yellow Fever fanzine, the hugely popular and successful fanzine of the period. This was episode 7. It was selling for the princely sum of £1. Picture of Dean Windass on the front and a joke about Keith Cox on the front. Keith Cox was our chairman at the time. Joke about Keith Cox on the back as well. Keith Cox was... Well, the joke was he was earning £67 an hour, which he was taking out of the club at a time when no one else was getting paid at all, it seemed. So that was the joke, basically. Rich, where were you?
So at this time I was stood on the upper terrace of the Beach Road, actually, where the hardcore stood getting rained on every other week. So, but the attendance on that terrace was slightly reduced that night because Sky Sports had commandeered part of it to build a makeshift studio in the corner. I don't know if you remember that. But yeah, we amused ourselves with verbally abusing Richard Keys as he walked past to the studio, with references to his hirsute hands, shall we say.
I think this is the last great night at the Manor. I don't think there was another kind of night that felt, that sort of classic under the floodlights thing. I think this was the last classic night, and I do remember the Sky coverage giving it an extra sheen, probably simply because of the arc lights and stuff like that, which maybe didn't happen in the kind of the big games of the 80s and stuff like that. There wasn't the production, so there was a kind of the whole stadium seemed to kind of shine. So I think, this was quite a special night, really, but we probably didn't know we didn't know at the time, probably because we thought we weren't going to survive until, for the next couple of weeks, because we were really in quite a serious state.
The club really were totally screwed at the time. I'm just going to show this. Like, it's called a VT. This is what Sky ran before the match, setting up the club's problems. Let's have a watch, and we'll have a chat about it afterwards.
Your guide to Oxford begins here, the magnificent stately home of the Duke of Marlborough, built in the 18th century. University colleges, some of the oldest in the world among the dreaming spires. Eccentricity, it seems marine life has more chance of survival here than the football club. Oxford's problems began with the ambitious plans to move here. The money ran out 2 years ago, and the club descended into the unseemly morass of financial crisis. Malcolm Shotton lifted the League Cup for the club in the good old days. Now he picks up the latest bills from the postman. And the food parcels are still coming.
The people in and around, not just Oxfordshire, the whole country really has supported the club in enormous amounts. Good wishes, little donations, but the people around Oxford have really rallied around the football club.
What about your own personal position, Malcolm? Did you go a length of time without being paid at all?
Yeah, it was about 9 or 10 weeks, I think. All the playing staff were paid. All the non-playing staff, which was my coaching staff, myself, all the girls and boys in the office, all went without pay.
How did you cope with that? How did you go back and tell your wife there's no money this month or whatever?
It was difficult. Obviously, for some worse than others. But we rallied round and we dug in as best we possibly could. And at the end of the day, we knew that the club would come through in one shape or form or another. hopefully it won't happen again. I mean, we had to sell players to keep the club going. That hasn't helped. We've had a couple of major injuries which haven't helped. Everything what seemed to go wrong went wrong. But you know, we're still in with a fighting chance to keep the club afloat. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We've got a couple of people interested, and you know, we're keeping our fingers crossed.
This may be a game between princes and paupers, haves and have-nots, but Oxford do have a bit of class amongst their supporters.
Isn't it awful? I hope these difficult financial situations will be resolved quickly, but at the moment there doesn't seem to be a fairy godfather or a fairy godmother on the horizon who's going to sort these problems out.
The odds tonight, only one winners as far as the bookies are concerned. 5-2 on Chelsea, 13-2 Oxford, 11-4 the draw.
First of all, the Duke of Marlborough's outfit is quite something, right?
Yeah, we should probably put some sort of warning at the start of this. May induce seizures or something of that nature, because it's pretty full on.
In terms of the Oxford team, actually, given we were selling players left, right, and centre that season, it's still not bad. There's quite a few of your favourites in there as well, OB.
Yeah, absolutely. Les Robinson, Paul Powell, of course, who should have played for England. Mark Watson, who we've featured previously. Yeah, I mean, it's a good side. Windass, obviously. It's a good side. But the thing that really jumped out at me is, of course, Elliot Jackson in goal, which I think I'd sort of come to I thought it was because of an injury, but it wasn't. We'd sold Phil Whitehead about 2 months earlier, and we didn't have a senior goalkeeper. Jackson was our most senior goalkeeper, but we bought Paul Gerrard in, who was cup-tied. Yeah, I mean, although it is a strong side, I think the fact that Jackson's featured is sort of a sign that things were starting to wobble.
The other thing that was taken away at the time as well was Dean Windass, who was a spectacularly good player for us in a very short period of time that he was with us. There was a lot of interest in him from other clubs at the time, and we kind of signed him under really strange circumstances. We agreed, I think it's something like 400,000 with Aberdeen, that we never actually paid them, and they were demanding their money, funnily enough. And we didn't actually end up paying Aberdeen until we'd sold Dean Windass, which happened a few weeks after this, I think.
I think Aberdeen actually were quite generous in allowing us to delay the payment. That's my understanding of it. But yeah, you're right. We ended up selling him to Bradford, and I guess made a profit, but that money had to, then be shelled out for his original transfer. Yeah,
I mean, it was insane that a club in our state were trying to shell out £450,000, even though obviously there was no cash involved at the time. But then we sold him on to Bradford for 800,000 or something like that in a period of 8-10 months. So so it was a heck of an investment in that sense. So Kassam was on the scene by this point, wasn't it? I don't know that his name was being bandied around. I mean, you guys were more deeply involved on the saving the club side of things, but Kassam was sort of coming in, and by the time we get to the replay, I don't think I'm not giving anything away I think we know what the result is, but by the time we get to the replay, he has actually taken the club over. So I think you're right. It probably delayed Windass going, because I don't think Windass went until fairly late in the season. And as you say, there was no transfer windows at the time. So it did delay it.
I think those of us who are involved with Fowl, I think we knew about him and we knew his name, but I don't think we were allowed to really talk about it. When was that Birmingham home defeat 7-1? That was December 98, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so we knew about him then, and I actually rang 606 and spoke to David Mellor about it, and we were kind of next to bottom of the first division as it was then. people haven't been paid for 2 months, like you say, food parcels. And then the BBC actually then rang me and said, could I appear on a BBC Choice show, which was hosted by Tom Watt, Lofty and EastEnders. And it was about midnight that night on Saturday. But it was kind of, we didn't have satellite TV at the time, so I was talking to him and a studio audience without being able to see them. And again, talking about the situation and, and basically saying, really, I don't care if we lose 7-1, as long as we still got a club to support next season. And I think on that call to Mella, I was saying, we understand there's someone very interested and a purchase is on the horizon, but I couldn't say any more. And that would have been Kassan. Yeah.
So what was your involvement, Dan, with Foul?
To be honest, I wasn't massively involved. My time was taken up doing Yellow Fever, and I mean, that took up enough time. I thought of the name Foul, though. That's my claim to fame. I invented the name Foul. It came to me. I was in a queue for my sandwich at lunchtime, and I was playing around with the O and the U in my head, trying to think, okay, how can I use the O and the U? And I came up with Soul, first of all, which was saving Oxford United's life. And then immediately thought, I can turn something a bit more football-y, and became Foul, which was fighting for Oxford United's life. And I went back immediately after lunch and I posted it on, I think, what's the Rage Online forum. And everyone said, oh yeah, brilliant idea. So that's my claim to fame. That was my contribution to saving the club. I invented the name for the group that did save the club.
I mean, so the big juxtaposition in this game is, of course, the opponents. So for as bad as we were teetering on the edge of oblivion, and what you've got on the other side is the sort of second wave of Premier League football. So you've got the first wave of excitement where people like Beckham burst onto the scene and people like that, and then the club started bringing in these players, superstars from overseas, and Chelsea, of course, were at the forefront of it. So this team that we were up against, who I think were top of the table at the time, I think we were second from bottom in the what is now the Championship, and they were top of the Premier League, and this was the team that we faced.
They finished third in the end in the Premier League, but they were definitely top when we played them. And yeah, I mean, that lineup is unbelievable. I mean, there's at least 2 World Cup winners from the year before in Leboeuf and Desailly. There's a very young John Terry there, and what must have been quite a young. Sorry,
I think it was his debut, his very first game for Chelsea. Okay.
And yeah, and other eagle-eyed viewers might have spotted a future Oxford United player amongst that starting 11 as well.
Mr. Dewberry.
Mr. Dewberry. Shall we watch the action?
Away and over, we shall see. Well, tiny ground with a sloping pitch, a small club on the very brink of
Swiss
flag.
Swiss flag. Who's that?
What do you reckon?
Truly, only happened in the FA Cup. Oxford United versus Chelsea is just moments away. An Oxford team who cost just £850,000 to assemble. I think there'll be 1 or 2 in the...
I mean, the Manor is looking magnificent at that point, isn't it?
I'm not going to bore you too much with technical TV talk, but Sky are quite famous for kind of ramping up the colour on their footage. If you ever compare a Sky match to a match, to the highlights that's on another channel, for instance, you'll see they're very different colours. And Sky turn up the sound effects and they turn up the colour just to make things look more colourful and more beautiful and sound even more exciting.
So are you saying it actually looks rubbish in real life?
No, I'm not saying that.
In real life,
it did look spectacular that night, in its kind of ramshackle and lovely way. But yeah, Sky do tweak the colours on things.
Oh, Paul Powell. Should have been huge.
So sad.
Yeah, dreadful. I know it's Jamie Cook in the shot when Robbo took that free kick. Jamie Cook was playing because Joe Beecham was suspended. I think it was his third game of 3-game suspension, so that's why he wasn't involved and why Jamie Cook was playing. And then Shotton actually stuck with the starting 11 from this side, so Beecham was on the bench at Chelsea.
Beecham was having quite a disappointing season, wasn't he, this season, compared to the previous year where he'd scored 19, 20 goals and effectively kept us up on his own. This season, I remember Beecham had been pretty disappointing. There's so much excitement at the start of the season. There was Big Kev, who's supposedly going to score hundreds of goals for us. Windass, who was a goal machine. Beecham, who just had his most productive season ever. And of course, Nicky Banger to balance the side out by not scoring goals. But yeah, there was so much excitement. It never quite happened for Beecham this year. I think, there's that thing about him not being the biggest fish in the team. And he always performed best when he was the big fish. And he wasn't quite this season.
Yeah.
Yeah, the straight red must have caused that 3-game suspension, which I'd imagine was a tasty tackle out of frustration or something. I don't remember.
First corner to Chelsea. Desai on the near post. Dewberry coming in behind him.
Dennis Wise, lovely man.
For another corner kick. By
Paul Tate. Wow, that's some late 90s curtains going on there, isn't it? That's great. I'm not sure if he's wearing his SH1T on the Villa t-shirt underneath that particular top.
Paul Tate we'd just signed a couple of games previously. So again, this whole thing about football transfers that I don't really understand. Here we are, 14 million in debt and unable to feed the squad, and we'd signed Paul Tate a few games earlier.
Yeah. And he was reasonable profile, wasn't he? He wasn't a nobody.
Yeah, he'd been at Birmingham for a long time, hadn't he? Yeah, like you say, on paper, there's a lot of really decent players there.
I suppose one of the things about this team is they are players that on their day were very good, but they weren't on their day enough to ensure they played at a higher level, really, with the exception probably of Windass.
And I think, I know it's a total cliche, but most players and managers deny that off-field problems affect their performance. But if ever a team were affected by off-field issues, it was this one.
Yeah.
It must be a factor. So I'm always drawn to the adverts in these sorts of games. There's no booze or fags this time. Maybe it was banned by then. But lots for Yorkie. Were Yorkie like a main FA Cup sponsor or something?
The Yorkie FA Cup. That would be disappointing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Having a word there with the fourth official, Gary Willard, Mr. Reid, the man in charge tonight.
Now, I watched the highlights earlier. I edited them down a little bit, and this bit fascinated me because Chelsea had complained that the ball was too inflated.
Really?
They said the ball was too hard, and they complained. So the ball, they either found a different ball or let a little bit of air out.
I like the fact they've got the police involved in this.
Yeah.
Well, George Gavin was in amongst that conversation. George, what was it all about?
Well, it's the first time I've heard of this, Alan. The Chelsea players were complaining the ball was too hard and they couldn't kick it properly, so they changed the ball because it was too hard.
Well, that's an old trick, Andy, isn't it? They used to soak them in water, didn't they, in days gone by?
What are you asking me for? I've always played when they've been plastic coated, I'll have you know.
I think, Obi, a few weeks ago you talked about how you'd have Matt Murphy around for dinner. Have you decided what you're going to cook him yet? Or?
Well, it would have to be something fairly bland. I've suddenly cast back to the Manor.
Yeah,
I mean, I think, see, Matt Murphy, scored a lot of goals for us, and was very loyal for a long period of time. I don't know, he probably wasn't a first choice at this stage even. He was more a, I'm tempted to say super sub.
I'm
Look at that
not
layoff.
sure.
That was nice.
I think because he scored. I think he scored twice in the previous round away to Crewe. He went away to Crewe, and I think he was
Yes.
regular. I think him and Gray were. Because Gray was, I mean, at this time, Gray was one of my favourite players because I thought he was so hard working. And, you know, he got booed. I remember being on the beach road and there were blokes on the terrace kind of trying to, you know, offer him out for a fight and all sorts. But I know the crowd ended up singing his name eventually. I think people got wind of the fact that he was actually really good for us. Murphy, I mean, he went through that phase where he was like scoring week in, week out. I mean, there was that worldie in the Daysty, was it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was
35 yards. I mean, yeah.
a couple of
So Matt
seasons.
Murphy this season, I remember him playing up front quite a lot. They actually played him as a striker alongside Windass, and that's certainly what he was playing this game. Because he wasn't quite good enough for midfield. He's a kind of really useful player from midfield in that he scored lots of goals from midfield, but he wasn't actually any good. So we'd quite often lose with him in the team when he played midfield. So I think this season they played him up front quite a lot. It's definitely this game he's playing up front. If you look at where he's like lining up on the pitch,
I think he's a little bit like I see Mark Sykes at the moment, where he's clearly got ability, but it's his USP, you know, his unique selling point isn't that obvious. So you don't quite know where to play him.
My preferred role for Sykes is that James Henry kind of inside right, but that's where James Henry plays. I think he's much better, a bit deeper than he is on the wing. I don't think he's a natural winger. I nearly ran over Mark Sykes in Bicester the other year. He was crossing the road at a very, very silly place. But we'll talk about that another time.
Chelsea is our Super Sunday match. 3 o'clock. The ball in towards Fanger there.
What I remember from this game was feeling tense, like you know, like when you tense your muscles, but for 90 minutes. I just didn't settle at all. I think because probably by this point in the game, I'd started to think we've got a chance here because Chelsea clearly weren't firing as we thought they might. We're playing above where we expected to be. And while it was 0-0, there was always a chance, obviously.
it was still though. There's that thing that we were so underdogs that in the first half when it was level, I was excited but not too nervous. In the second half, when we're leading, and you know that so much is riding on it, that's where the nerves really kicked in. I just remember feeling sick for pretty much 7 minutes of the second half. But this was just kind of fantasy at the time. Here we are against this kind of massive, huge spending Chelsea team, and we're not just holding them, but we're doing really well. We've still got nothing to lose at this point as well, right? There's literally nothing for us to lose. If we lost 4-5-0, we wouldn't have been surprised, I don't think.
Well, I think when we play teams like this, while it's still 0-0, there is that sort of tenseness that it might, this could turn into something special. I have had games where, I think it was against Manchester City a couple of years ago, when they scored, I relaxed because, suddenly the world had reordered itself and everything was as I expected it to be. But of course with this game, it wasn't like that. That sort of sense of anticipation was, the chance of a big upset was there throughout. I think Martin Gray's one of those players that you miss when they're gone. A bit crab-like. That's what people always used to talk about.
Yeah, sideways passing only.
We were terribly cruel about him in Yellow Fever. Really quite kind of unpleasantly cruel about him sometimes. And with hindsight, I regret that now. I was once travelling back from somewhere up north on a train, and it was an incredibly crowded Trans-Pennine Express train, and I was holding on to the bar like you do, and I looked around, and who should be standing next to me but none other than Martin Gray. And I felt I had this kind of dilemma for about 20 minutes. Do I apologise for all the nasty things that I'd said about him? And no, I didn't. I just kept quiet. He looked quite violent, to be fair, so I didn't bother to.
Just to balance that out, then I only ever wrote one article for your rival, Ray John, and it was actually called Grey Matter, and it was in praise of Martin Gray. I'd got to know Martin Radetzky a little bit through Foul, actually. We went to some games together. We went to Scunthorpe away on a Tuesday night and lost 1-0 in the last minute. It's one of Shotton's last games with Martin. Yes, so I wrote that, and it might have been in this season's, in one of those this season's fanzines, I'm not sure. When Martin Gray left the club, again, just to make you feel even worse, Dan, I wrote to him. He went to Darlington, is that right?
Yeah, he was there for a long time. I think that's.
Yeah, and he became their sort of manager, didn't he?
Yeah.
Took them back up through the divisions. But yeah, I wrote to Martin Gray to kind of say, not all of us thought the same way about you. You were much appreciated, and I was so pleased when players were singing your name, eventually. And I think I mentioned he scored a goal against Reading at the Manor, about a 2-1 win or something, and it must have been towards the end of the year, because he then sent me a Christmas card. And in it, and I can't find it for love nor money, he sent me a Christmas card, and in it, he had cut out a picture from a local newspaper in Darlington. There's a photograph of him, the famous shot of Vinnie Jones squeezing Gazza's unmentionables. It was one of him doing that to an opponent. And he literally cut it out of the newspaper and sellotaped it into a Christmas card to me. And I desperately wish I could find it, but it's lost to history, I think. But yeah, that is absolutely true. What a lovely man. Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, Dan. What have you got to say for yourself?
Yeah, not much. Oh, there we go. Oh, so close. Now, Dean Windass was some player. I was living in Hull a couple of years before this. So 94 to 97, I was living in Hull, the university there. And the first season and a half of that, Dean Windass was playing for Hull. I managed to go and watch Hull City play. And, I saw this guy play and I thought, my God, he's really good. He is really, 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 really good. And then followed his career after he left Hull. So he went to Aberdeen next, where he had a slightly kind of tempestuous relationship with the club. He was either brilliant or getting sent off, it seemed. So when the rumours started that we were going to sign him, and I think he signed because he'd known Malcolm Shotton, who played at Hull with him. When the rumours started that we were going to sign, I just could not believe that we were in for this guy who was as good as I knew he was.
Yeah, he was recently on Russell Brand's new podcast called Football is Nice, which is well worth a listen. But I was a bit gutted because they talked about him a lot and then they had him on the phone. We didn't mention Oxford once, and I thought, actually, we were the springboard to where he went on to. We took him out of obscurity. He was saying that Brian Horton was manager of Hull and they let him go. And he was gutted because he was a Hull supporter, he was a hometown boy. And like you say, ended up at Aberdeen. At Aberdeen, one game he got the equivalent of 3 red cards because he got a straight red, then he got a red for something to do with abuse, and then he got a red for then sort of smashing something up on the way off the pitch. And that was just before he joined us. Yes, I was a bit disappointed that he didn't he didn't talk about us in more detail on that podcast, which is a good podcast, I should say. Other podcasts are available. Now, years later, he scored the winner at Wembley in the playoff final, which took Hull to the Premier League. And Brian Horton was assistant manager to Phil Brown. So he'd gone full circle. And he said he offered his winner's medal to Brian Horton to say, kind of thank you for sort of how things have worked out. But he said Brian Horton refused to take it. And now I think he's had to sell all of his stuff for, I don't know, something for charity or just for his own income. But Yeah, really interesting guy and a very interesting career as well.
I think I mean, looking at him now, I can't see it, but he kind of had that Paul Gascoigne feel about him. You know, a bit of a character and that kind of stuff.
You weren't wrong. And the 21-year-old goalkeeper was on his toes. Well, you know what,
Yeah.
The goals he scored in the context of how we were playing at the time was phenomenal.
I mean, he wasn't quick, which probably stopped him from being like you know, a top player. But he was so strong in the ball. He could pass the ball better with his chest than most of our team could with their feet. And he scored loads and loads and loads of goals. And yeah, he was just an amazing player. So you probably can tell from the way that the clock has whizzed past, these are edited highlights of the match. But we're half time and really even. You know, we've had as many chances as they've had. We're obviously playing up the hill this half, so you know we know what's coming in the second half.
Nicky Banger. Discuss.
There was another player I was very rude about in my fanzine, actually.
Well, his surname just invites it, doesn't it, really, to be honest.
Do you think his name really is Banger, and he's kind of changed it to sound a bit better?
Well, like Mrs. Bouquet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, he's not called Ed DeGooey either, apparently. I saw Banger play for us. It must have been late that season, maybe a couple of months after. We won away at Sheffield United. And Paul Gerrard produced one of the best saves I've ever seen in my life. And Bain just scored with a direct free kick, I think.
He did, yeah.
That was just such an outlier for that season, for us to win away. I mean, yeah. Just sheer luck that I happened to be able to.
But Banger had a bit of a reputation coming in, a bit like Paul Tate, because that's what we were kind of good at, was picking up players that were talented but still had a little bit in them. So go back to Johnny Byrne, Kevin Francis, who's on the bench here, Banger. But Banger didn't fire in the same way that Francis and the others did.
I hope Kevin Francis doesn't come off the bench. That would be just disastrous, surely.
Talk about Francis in the second half, but there's a really interesting backstory that's not very well known about Francis this season. I will share it with you at an appropriate time in the second half. Maybe it's really well known, I don't know. I might say, and you might both go, oh, we knew that already.
There he is, Martin Gray.
Your mate.
Lovely bloke.
Was it a one-off Christmas card, or did they keep on coming every year with him grabbing other players?
It was a one-off. It was a one-off, yeah.
You sent one to him, though, every year.
Oh, yeah, obviously, yeah. Care of Darlington FC. Don't even know if he's there anymore. He did really well.
We're still very sorry.
Yes, yeah. And now I can actually put names of individuals who are personally sorry, you know. Until now, it was just a kind of a blanket apology.
Now, I'm definitely somewhere in there. I can't quite spot myself because of the grainy footage, but I'm definitely in there because I can make out a couple of other people who I did know, who I stood roughly near. There we go, half time. How you feeling, boys? Feeling good for the second half?
Well,
I think we've got a chance. You know, kicking down the slope, you've always got a chance.
Exactly that. What took the words out of my mouth.
Straight in for the second half? Let's do it.
Let's do it. Joined us. It's Oxford United 0, Chelsea 0.
We ought to mention the kit.
Well, it's a sore point. So I spent all afternoon looking for mine because it's actually one of my favourites, and I cannot find it anywhere.
I think it's like the default Oxford United kit. Everything should be compared to it. It's the perfect Oxford United kit for me.
It was a thing of beauty, and it was the first time in years we'd had a decent manufacturer as well, like a manufacturer you'd actually heard of, as opposed to like this one, which was made by that well-known brand OUFC, for instance.
Yes, or mine, which is Match Winner.
And the Sows conceded another throw out the half from within Oxford. Danger doing well to come out with the ball. Robinson's cross is good. Turned in on the near post. Couldn't reach the loose ball. Comes out to Gray, and that shot took a nasty deflection as well, but it did take the sting out of it for Zola. And a little scrap there involving Dennis Wise, and a man whose disciplinary records would have a pretty thick pile, I think.
Wise and Gray, that's a good match, isn't it?
See, I never saw us as being a kind of we were never a nasty team, but a savvy team. But if you think about Tate and Gray and Windass, Robinson, Mike Ford left the season before, but we had a lot of grit in that side.
David Smith was on the bench as well this game. He was basically Martin Gray's twin brother. And he also was just a slightly kind of dirty match. Well, he was a street fighter, basically, wasn't he? I think that's what they called him. Someone who just literally kind of went around kicking the flair players of the other team and winning the ball back, which I guess we did need.
But at the time, the purists are, we want everybody to be Joe Beecham. But we needed those players. Got a chance here.
We're never going to score. Never. Not against Chelsea. Not against the money bags of Chelsea.
From, the size of their centre halves, how are we ever going to get goal from the set piece? Desai, Dewberry, Terry, LeBeuf. Oh, hang on.
What?
Yeah, and he came and celebrated in front of the Beach Road Hardcore. They talk about it being a gritty team, Dan. I guess we had a very gritty manager, which probably was a big factor in that. We know what he's like as a player and as a manager. I guess we can't say too much without saying allegedly, but I think he was quite the
Sergeant Major type.
Sergeant Major.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, last time we were in 1986 and there was a lot of pistachios. This is 1999 and we've still got Shotton. Ed De Hoyer's got a moustache and one of the linesmen has got a moustache. So it's still, they're hanging around. And these are non-ironic, non-hipster moustaches as well. Yeah. We'll do that. We'll do a Tash count for every show.
Did he play for us again, Elliot Jackson?
He played more games than I thought.
Obviously. But,
yeah. But he'd played quite a lot prior to that. So we obviously sold Whitehead and brought Gerrard in, but he did play quite a few games in between. Your mind plays tricks on you. I kind of thought this was his only game. you know, that he'd come in for this one game, had an absolute worldie, and then disappeared again. But yeah, he played quite a few games. But he was tremendous. It's absolutely brilliant. In many ways, and I've seen the full coverage. It doesn't do it justice of just how good he was.
You thought he was the Paul Swanwick of the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They scored from the last one. Well, he gave Dougray a chance. You know, we knew he'd come back on his left foot. I thought he should have delivered it, but he wanted to go outside onto his right. Gave Dougray the chance. He can't produce again. Fantastic noise now around the Manor ground. As the he only just got that one clear. The free kick has been given to Chelsea. No, it just gives him a chance. Gets settled.
I don't know how many corners we got in this game. There's a lot.
And unlike a certain team we could mention playing in yellow and blue at the moment, we seem to be quite good at corners then as well.
Yeah. It was always a threat, wasn't it?
Well, my teens on 20s were spent watching teams in yellow and blue score from corners all the time. We just seemed to have the same routine no matter who was in the team. We'd have a near post corner, we'd have a big guy on the near post flicking it on, and then 2 or 3 people bundling in behind him and scoring. It seemed to happen a lot for quite a long time.
That's my go-to corner tactic. You know, even now at games, I don't know why we don't have somebody on the front post to flick it on. I'm sure corner science has moved on since then.
A bit of gallows humour from the Oxford fans. We're bust, but we're beating you as a cry. Oh dear. Football fans, brilliant, isn't it? They have been particularly brilliant here in Oxford as well, with collections around the city, and as has been famously mentioned, food parcels sent to the office staff who went without any wages for a couple of months. So too did the manager, and the PFA had to step in. There's Matt Murphy who's coming off. And the applause will tell you how popular Kevin Francis is. He'll be replaced here by Matt Murphy, or take the place of Matt Murphy. Kevin Francis making his first appearance of the season, would you believe? Well, Malcolm Shorten is no shorty. Kevin is towering above his manager. He's had 2 operations on a serious knee injury, hasn't even played a reserve game.
So the story about Big Kev was that he'd almost died a few months earlier. I don't know if you remember, the season before this, he'd had an amazing run-in with us. He joined us with like 15 games to go and had just come in and done brilliantly. We used him perfectly. We didn't just lump long balls up at him. We used him as a kind of a proper threat. So we built our entire game around getting wingers to whipping crosses, and he would be there and header in, which is how he used Big Kev. And he'd been absolutely brilliant for us. And then in the pre-season friendly at the start of this season, we played, I think they were the Greek champions, Panionios. And Big Kev had he'd just come back from knee surgery, and he played that game and got his knee infected. And everyone just thought, oh, you know, it's going to be a small problem. He'll be in hospital for a very short time while they clean it out. But actually, it got worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where he was almost like, you know, it was a life or death situation for a while. And then he recovered, came back, and he was rushed back for this game. He hadn't played in absolutely ages, and came back for this game. And as you can tell from what happened, he clearly isn't ready for match play at all. And I felt incredibly bad for him, knowing what happened in this game after what he'd been through.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because that is, I only when looking at this previously, realised this was his first game of the season.
Yeah,
and it's not like he'd been in and out of the team. He just hadn't played, and like you say, so what will subsequently happen in a few minutes? You've got to put it into that context.
And which is why he got such a warm reception when he came on. because he'd been absolutely brilliant. Because we've been looking forward to him and Windass playing together all season, because they're both they both had amazing goal scoring records. And everyone was really excited to have him back, but he'd been rushed back basically and was nowhere near ready to play.
I didn't realise it was that serious.
I don't remember hearing that at all. I wonder if, Shotgun probably brought him on because, for his defensive abilities at set pieces. I'd imagine.
It's a strange substitution when you look at who else is on the bench as well. We're winning 1-0 at the time, and you're bringing on a guy who's not played in 6 months, 7 months. It's a strange substitution. Really.
But I think sometimes managers fall into the trap of kind of believing magic, and so the idea of Francis coming on and scoring and on a great night sort of overrides the logic, which is he clearly wasn't match fit and there were other better players to bring on.
Yeah, I think the classic example of that for me is when Graham Taylor took off Lineker for Alan Smith, and if it had worked, it would have been a stroke of genius.
Yeah,
but he didn't.
Yeah,
I noticed Francis came on as sub and he was number 16. And I guess because we're in the first division, we're still playing 1 to 11 as the starting lineup. And then the subs have, I guess, 12 onwards. Whereas Chelsea have squad numbers. So I'm guessing the Premier League had squad numbers by this point, names on the shirts, etc. But it hadn't filtered down into the lower leagues by then.
That's right. I think it's one of the things that around that time it was the sort of thing that illustrated the real gap that was there between, not just obviously, I think they say in the commentary the team's 28 million quid, which is a lot of money, but it was that whole how they looked was different. Physically they looked bigger and stronger, but yeah, the squad numbers and everything just completely different world to the one we were in.
I guess their stadium was a little bit better as well at that point. Although I hate Stamford Bridge is horrible. Just to look at it's so 90s, isn't it? The outside is so 90s. I think it's like this, it's so 90s. It's the stadium equivalent of the Seinfeld logo. It's horrible, and it's the least comfortable I've ever been at a football match. Kev.
I reckon he was laying it off for Cook.
An extravagant layoff.
Yeah.
A 2-footed layoff.
Look at that, incredible.
Yeah, basically he's done okay on the pitch until this point, and basically everything from here on in is a bit of a disaster.
Again, he could have stopped that, shakes his head. Glorious opportunity.
The challenge by Paul Tate on LeBoeuf earlier was horrific.
Here we go, this is it in slow motion.
Ooh. Would he get a yellow?
I don't think he got anything actually.
No,
that's a straight red now, isn't it? Easily.
Yeah.
But that's the one that LeBoeuf took issue with that, because as he walked past, Shotton was praising Tate for the challenge. And yeah, there we go. Okay,
is this what this is about? Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, Shotton was sort of saying nice one, and maybe literally just
that is in the black hat.
That's Graham Ricks.
Our mate, omnipresent Graham Ricks.
Of course, yeah, Viala's assistant.
Are we trying to sneak him into every episode?
I was going to say, I think he might be the only ever present.
Ooh.
Oh dear, oh dear.
I just wonder if they'll live to regret that glorious opportunity. First Francis, then Cook.
There's Lascelles. And it's come through for Di Matteo. The goalkeeper is proving an absolute hero for Oxford tonight.
I'm not so sure that wasn't a centre-back, Mark Watson. I have to say, Alan, as he goes in, I thought this is it. Great step over from Zola. He looks to take it. It is Watson. He gets over. Magnificent block. Two centre-backs have been absolutely exceptional.
And Tate heads it away straight against the referee as it happened. Here's the throw. Gilchrist clearance to Saeed, and then the shot, and the goalkeeper again has produced a brilliant fingertip save, and Dennis Wise can't believe that he kept that out.
I mean, to be fair to Elliot Jackson, he's making some unbelievable saves here.
Almost 30 yards, bending into the corner. Super save from Elliot Jackson.
I mean, we've got so many clubs at the minute who are financial basket cases. We really were, at the time, we were like one of the original basket case clubs, right? And I remember at Stockport, we played Stockport shortly after this, and their fans were doing like a bucket collection for Oxford United and stuff. I just remember everyone having kind of huge amounts of kind of sympathy and kind of, you know, good feeling towards us. Which is really, I think it's strange. It's strangely beautiful, I think.
Probably people who are not fans of the Maxwell family. Arguably,
I mean, there was an element of that, perhaps, that you know, we'd been hard done by, because although we'd had a couple of owners since Maxwell, it all starts with Maxwell's death in '91, and it was that basically people had toyed around with us and got us into a mess, and it was nothing to do with the fans. And maybe that's where a lot of sympathy came from, is that the fans ultimately are the victims.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's the nature of how it happened, because I feel sorry for Derby fans now.
Yeah.
I don't have much sympathy for how that occurred, because they flaunted rules, they brought Rooney in through some, you know, circuitous route involving betting firms. It's hard to feel sympathy with that club as some might have felt for us. And I remember, I mean, I've contributed to several fundraisers. Bury. It was quite close from Banger, wasn't it?
No. Well, close for Banger. It's as close
For
as
Banger,
we've got, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
The goal didn't even make it into the shot with that one.
Yeah, I think I can't remember, in Rochdale maybe, where you donated, maybe put your name on one of their seats, and yeah, I mean, I'm more inclined to feel sympathy for a club like that. Aha!
May we?
People have to play well for Malcolm Short to keep the win. The goalkeeper and the two centre-backs in particular.
One for the kids here. Christophe Remy looked remarkably like Timothy Claypole from Rentagos. And another moustache.
Yeah. Goatee. Very 90s.
Yeah.
Moustaches are involved. Oh dear.
There's Gunther. No Gunther. Not Gunther. So I am somewhere, I reckon, just behind Gunt. That's exactly who I stood next to.
I like that you can name the crowd.
Yeah. Well, just got to see this out for the last bit of injury time.
Yeah, just get it away. Anywhere.
Yeah. Hoof it up.
I mean,
remember that moment of disbelief.
I mean, he does get the ball.
Yeah.
But would VAR overturn that? I think it's one of those ones that VAR would not overturn either way. If he'd given it, I don't think it would be overturned. If it wasn't given, it wouldn't be a penalty.
I think it's more contentious than history has written. It's a trickier call, and I think there's an element in this where, because it's Francis who's gangly, that you kind of expect him to do something that's clumsy. There's a whole, and of course, you know, Chelsea are this refined, you know, skilled team. The celebration here is outrageous.
Again, that's celebrations from players who know how to play up to cameras week in, week out.
Yeah.
They're media trained.
This
Well,
is how
Jackson
you
was so
celebrate.
close to it as well. It makes me feel sick in the stomach. I mean, a lot of things that you say about why was Francis on the pitch anyway. What went through his head, because Vialli had his back to goal. There was no need to make that challenge whatsoever. There's so many yellow shirts. Yeah.
And also, he was an experienced player, and like you say, if you just ushered him out, just ushered him out, but he could have just sort of buffeted him rather than go lunging in.
I mean, the irony of this, I guess, is that there's full house, full capacity Oxford United fans, players, staff, everybody absolutely gutted by that. Yet, financially, it was the best thing that could have happened to us, really, isn't it?
Yep.
We needed that replay money. So, yeah, I'm not saying that replay money saved us, but probably paid staff a couple of weeks. Another moustache and the steward there.
Well, I guess you could have talked to your creditors at this point to say, well, we've got another payday coming in 10 days' time.
Yeah.
Yes.
It might have staved off the Windass transfer to Huddersfield, perhaps.
Yeah.
It would have done.
But as you say, by that point, you know, kind of the whole emotion had taken over. This was about winning the game, not about the money. I mean, later on, they analyse it from the perspective that this is the best result for Oxford, which logically it was, but terrible stuff.
Hard to take.
Oh, I felt sick. I felt absolutely sick at the end. I went to the Butcher's Arms afterwards and drowned my sorrows, and then staggered back onto the X90 back to London, incredibly drunk, and just feeling absolutely heartbroken by it all.
There's an eerie silence after a last minute goal at the Manor, because inside, of course, it's broiling, you know, it's noisy and all that kind of stuff, and then you just filtered out. When you filtered out from the London Road and you went down the alleyway, and there's deathly silence as you kind of filtered out. Nobody talked to each other. It was just awful.
It was the same on the Beach Road, but to be fair, that was probably every week. It was pretty quite walking.
So what happened next, OB? Talk us through the following week or two.
So, I mean, in terms of the league, I think we actually did snatch a win in between this game and the replay, but we headed off to Stamford Bridge, started with the same side, and then 2-3 minutes in, I remember I was working in London at the time, and I remember going straight from work on the tube, packed full of Chelsea fans, and I'd never been to a Premier League ground. I'd been to a top flight ground before, but I'd never been in the Premier League era. And so the whole place was like some sort of American razzmatazz, all this sort of stuff. It was a completely different world to me. And then 5 minutes into the game, we took the lead. And I do distinctly remember this, you know, we've really angered them here. We are never, I don't know if I can handle this, because I can't do this for 85 minutes. I can't hang on like this for 85 minutes. And eventually, they had Mikael Forsell, didn't they? I think was possibly making his debut.
Yes, it was his debut. He was 17, yeah.
Yeah. And he was magnificent. And Zola scored a fantastic lob as well. We did get a second with a penalty, I think.
Windass again, wasn't it?
Windass again, yeah.
Just before the end, yeah.
And you were saying that Dennis Wise got sent. Well, I know Dennis Wise got sent off, but I didn't realise it was in the circumstances.
Yeah, I think it was sort of in. I think he got 2 yellows in the space of about 2 minutes. It's also worth noting that Mike Reid was the referee for that replay as well. Apparently, Oxford United could have requested a change of ref, but we didn't,
right,
for whatever reason. So he reffed that match as well. Yeah.
So we ended up losing that 4-2. But the thing I probably should have mentioned in between the two games was the takeover by Mr. Feroz Kassam. who took the club over at that point.
So I remember going to the Chelsea game on the tube. Again, I finished work. I was working in London and got the tube around to Stamford Bridge. And I remember seeing something on the back page of the Standard saying Oxford buoyed by takeover, and being so excited by it and thinking, oh my God, this is really exciting. It was the first time I think that the Kassam name had appeared. And I remember looking at every kind of well-dressed Asian businessman on the tube thinking, I wonder if he's Feroz Kassam, you know, coming to watch the game. And I remember afterwards, the players went to one of his hotels in London for their post-match meal.
Yes.
I remember that vividly as well.
But it was, wow. So it was obviously around a time where there was a lot of sugar daddies. I don't know, had Chelsea haven't been taken over by Abramovich at that point, I don't think. But
no,
Jack Walker,
still Ken Bates, was it?
Yeah. Okay. Yes,
yeah.
It was, because there was an argument about who got the ticket revenue. There was a suggestion that Chelsea didn't need it and handed it over to Oxford, and Ken Bates wouldn't give it to us. Bless him. You know, there was Jack Walker and people like that. So, and the Premier League obviously was making a lot of money. And Kassam came in worth whatever they were saying he was worth, 200, 300 million pounds. It's one of those kind of very heavily caveated thing of, you know, the richest Asian in the UK or something like that. And yeah, this was the sort of rebirth, is what I think everybody was expecting. I think they were expecting us to just plough tens of millions of pounds into the club and turn it into a Premier League team.
And instead, we sold Dean Windass and got relegated. So that was
yes,
good.
That's right. Yeah,
because at the time we were talking about him. I mean, hindsight is 2020, but I mean, at the time we were talking about him being our saviour. And I guess there is an argument to be made that without him, we may not be sat here now. We may not have had a club to support. So despite what he ended up doing and the way he did it, and you know the aggravation that all caused a lot of people, at the time, we couldn't foresee that. And actually, it just felt like, a huge relief. Yeah, he was the man. And yeah.
We've jumped on a bit. Do you want to hear from the players themselves after the match? This is a little compilation of clips. It includes Jim Smith, who was the Sky pundit, going totally mad at the end as well. So here we go.
Okay, guys, 1-1 is a great result, but you must feel as though you're being robbed, do you?
Personally, yeah. I mean, I hope it'll show up on your TV monitors later on, but, you know, where did the ball go? I mean, you know, what else can we say without getting in trouble with referees in the FA? So,
what did you feel about the tackle that you made?
Well, I wouldn't have gone in for it if the ball wasn't there. I mean, I played the ball went out for a throw-in, I think. Never mind a corner. And as they do, like, you know, they've gone down, he's rolled a little bit. Referees fell for it, give it them.
I mean, the boys were magnificent. I mean, I didn't have hardly anything to do, 2 or 3 saves. And I mean, it's just gutting when something like that happens.
And Dean, this is a replay for you. Financially for the club, what does it mean?
Yeah, obviously for the club, it's very important. The club wanted the wager anyway, so they've got that now anyway. But as you say, we'll look forward to going there, and you know, we'll probably do well again.
You should be celebrating in there, but it'll be a bit like a wake now, won't it?
Yeah, as you say, I'm gutted, you know, to be quite honest with you, George. But as you say, it carries on and you play again.
We can show you an angle of the penalty. Kevin Francis on Luca Vialli.
I think he's took the ball.
Here it is again, have a look.
Boys have defended brilliant, and I think he's took the ball.
You don't think he's come from behind a little bit?
I think he's come from the side, but I think if the referee's got any angle, he sees him coming from the side.
Difficult to talk about referees' decisions, but do you think you would have got that in your favour at the other end?
No.
You've had a hard time tonight, haven't you, really?
I'm going to bite my tongue here. Yes.
It's a shame, isn't it, in a democracy that managers can't say what they want to in situations like that. Very dignified, Malcolm Shotton. Say straight away, not Chelsea's fault. You'll take it. Anybody would in the same circumstances, but that's tough, Jim, isn't it? That's very tough tonight.
Well, they were cheated, to be honest. I feel really sorry for the club and Malcolm and the boys. I thought they were just cheated. I thought the decision was an absolute disgrace.
From a catalogue, really, a throw-in that perhaps wasn't theirs in the first place, a corner that I think you had some doubts about.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
Is there a touch there?
If he'd have had my haircut, it wouldn't have been.
If there was a touch, it was a hair's breadth, wasn't it? Quite literally.
Very harsh decision.
And then from the corner, Chelsea did their job, kept it in there.
Well, he's played the ball. The big fella's played the ball. Got tied on. He's not gone from the back. The referee's probably a little bit.
Well, he's a little to the left, and he's just reported to us that he had a perfect view and felt that Francis came through him. There he is. Look, you just see him to the left of the screen.
Yeah, that's a typical referee's reply. He didn't look through him. He played the ball. The first guy to play the ball was Francis.
Churlish to point out again that it's the same ref that gave the penalty against Leicester, isn't it? But it was the same ref that did, isn't it?
So he's saying that Mike Reid has a bit of previous giving penalties to big clubs against smaller clubs, and so I do remember feeling that sense of injustice and kind of the inevitability of the injustice was coming the whole way through.
I think he anticipated that they would have a chance, or that they would that we would have to resort to foul play in order to keep them out. So he whilst I don't think he cheated as such, but I think he anticipated a problem, and then when he saw something that looked like a problem, that's when he gave it. Shocking.
Yeah, he'd done the same 2 years previously. Again for Chelsea, I think it's against Leicester.
Yeah.
In a replay. So yeah, not only did he have history, it was also with Chelsea. I did have a look online actually, and the Guardian said that the decision was preposterous, and that the replay would be played under a cloud of injustice. There you go.
That's the Guardian.
Exactly. They knew. They know injustice when they see it at the Grand. Definitely.
Well, we hope you enjoyed watching us collapse in the 90th minute against Chelsea. Join us next time when we'll be watching another game, but we don't know which. We'll figure that out. So, Dan, Rich, see you later.
Take care.
See you, everyone. Bye.